Great. Thanks, Anne.
You're welcome.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This meeting of the Board of Chiropractic Examiners Licensing Committee is being held by teleconference pursuant to the statutory provisions of Government Code Section 11133. The date is Friday, May 12th, and the time is 10:32. The board's paramount responsibility is to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the public through licensure, education, engagement, and enforcement in chiropractic care. Members of the public may address the committee during the public comment session. Public comments will also be taken on agenda items at the time the item is heard and prior to the committee taking any action on said items. Those who would like to provide public comment will be limited to 3 minutes unless in the discretion of the committee, circumstances require a longer period. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their allotted time to other members of the public to make comments. Individuals may appear before the committee to discuss items not on today's agenda. However, the committee may not discuss or take action on these items except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded, and please turn off or silence your cell phones, and we will now take roll. Ms. Cruz, can you take the roll, please?
Yes. Dr. Daniels?
Present.
Jeanette Cruz, present. We have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Okay, so agenda item number 1 is to approve the meeting minutes that we had on February 24th, 2023. Are there any questions, comments, or changes to the meeting minutes?
None for me.
Ms. Walker?
No.
Okay. All right. So I'd like to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes for February 24th, 2023 as is.
Second.
Okay. And moderator, can you open up this agenda item to the public, please?
Certainly. We've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If you have a comment on the minutes, you can look for the question mark icon, tap that, type the word comment in the text box and click send. The other option is anyone may raise their hand by clicking on the hand icon. Are there any comments on the minutes? I do not see any comments on the minutes. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Ms. Cruz, will you take the vote?
Yes. Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz? Yes. And so moved.
Motion passes.
Yep. Motion passes.
And let's move to the next agenda item, and that's an update on the board's licensing program. So I'll turn that over to you, Ms. Walker, to provide us with an update.
Sure, thank you. So in the past about 2.5 months since the licensing committee last met, primarily our work has been in the area of the Connect system, as well as focusing on legislation and regulation. Beginning with the Connect system, I'll be brief. We did provide an update as well at the board meeting. But with the Connect system, I'm happy to report that at the end of February of 2023, we updated our user dashboards, and we providing additional information and tabs in the Connect system. And then we also simplified the access to get to the Doctor of Chiropractic license application, as well as simplifying the criteria for which the system will allow a user to gain access into the renewal application. So far, that functionality has been live now. We had an additional outage shortly after the release, so we were affected by a few weeks, but we've had that now in production for about 6 weeks. Overall, it's been going well. What we're still finding is that users are having issues with accessing by either linking their account or accessing the healthcare survey that's part of the license renewal process. So what we'll be working with the department on is simplifying and identifying those error messages that they're getting in those instances. Just to provide a little background, what happens is there's certain criteria that's used to match and validate their data to allow them access into the system. And if there's no match, right now they're getting a generic error message that what the information you've provided doesn't match the board's records, but it doesn't tell them what specifically the problem is. So it's creating quite a bit of troubleshooting on the staff's end, trying to identify the problem and move it to resolution. So we're going to be working on is simplifying those error messages to provide more clarity to not only the user, but staff, so that we can quickly rectify those for users and move them forward. But other than that, I am happy to report that it seems to be working better than in the past. And then from there, we need to really start advertising the service out to the licensees so we can try to drive more traffic into the system. Now that we've kind of had it in production for a bit, it seems reliable. We'd like to get the volume significantly increased. So we do need to begin the outreach efforts of really making the system known. The other area that we're working on with respect to the Connect system, we were offered the opportunity to participate in an upgrade to a newer version of the system. Of the 4 programs in the current cohort, we are the first ones that are going to go through the gate on that. We've been coordinating with the department on what that process is going to look like and how we're going to walk from the the current functionality that we have in place and how we're going to get to this newer version of the software. The benefit to us by moving to this new version of the software is that it provides additional functionality for us to customize various questions on applications and make changes to our workflow without having to involve the vendor and have a developer make the changes for us. So it gives us increased autonomy within our system, and we can take the resources, the limited resources that we have on the project, and divert them elsewhere into really ensuring that we're developing new content and that we're not just making incremental system cleanup changes and burning all of our hours on the project. Are there any questions from the committee on the Connect project?
Ms. Cruz, any questions?
Do we, what's it called? What is the timeline kind of we're anticipating, kind of any?
We're anticipating making the transition during the summer. We're still finalizing that timeline, but what we're continuing to develop in the current system, and then we're working with the department to lay out what that timeline looks like, is how we transition those development activities from the version of the software that we're currently on into that newer version. So we're anticipating to actually make the leap and be on the new version of the software sometime this summer.
Okay, so yeah, so what I'm hearing is kind of likely you're working through kind of current process, the interim process, future process, and then trying to, what's it called, kind of make sure things don't fall out along the way. So thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
I had a question. What does the plan look like for the advertising to the licensees to sort of get the word out about the application?
It's going to begin with creating a listserv message that we're going to send out to our email subscribers. We're also going to share the message with the associations so that hopefully they can get the word out to their mailing lists. We're about hitting about the middle of May, so we will be getting that messaging out ideally by the end of next week so that we can start driving traffic. We particularly noticed that there's kind of the frenzy at the end of the month as people's license expiration dates are quickly approaching, and this is where it does provide a good avenue for them to just quickly take care of the transaction online. And then the license itself will renew within 48 hours with no further need to follow up with us. So that's where I think we're going to get that messaging out to the association starting next week so that hopefully we can catch some of the May renewals, but definitely see hopefully an increase in June for the system utilization.
Okay. And then since you brought it up, I did have a question on, we had talked about in last meeting about streamlining, getting information out to the associations and colleges, sort of making sure that we're outreaching to the licensees, not that they have to just check our website. So I was just wondering, do we have like a streamlined process in place? Is someone in charge of that? What do we have in the works as far as getting that, just regular new information out in a timely manner to the association so they can really inform the licensees?
So we need to get that information transmitted over to the associations. We've had some internal discussions on how we would make that happen. We've also made some efforts towards recruiting the assistant executive officer position, which is really going to be crucial in making sure that we can get a lot of these program improvements moving forward. So we've made some progress there, but haven't gotten the work itself done just yet.
Okay. And then what do you see as the pitfalls? Any specific pitfalls as far as doing the upgrade, besides the system crashing? Is there any, things that we're concerned about that might delay it?
No specific concerns at this point. They did give me access to another board. Just to clarify, the cohort 2 boards that have followed behind those of us that initially went onto the Connect system, that's the version of the software that they're currently on. So all of those other boards have been testing and working within that system. So it's a matter of transitioning us to that system and making sure that our business processes follow and that the testing and everything is working as expected. We're not anticipating much problems in that area, just given that we've already got other boards with similar work processes that are already using the software. We are going to extensively test it to ensure that it works, just given that we've had challenges on the current version that we're on and getting to where we're at now where it's reliable. So it's going to be really a staff-wide effort to test and make sure that we're not encountering any kind of errors in that new version of the software.
Okay. And then just one more question. So I went on the website and I saw that you added sort of renew online, those kind of hot buttons. So I clicked on it, but it didn't link me. I was on my cell phone. I wasn't on a computer. And I could link to other links within our website. Has there been any complaints as far as, is there a problem with trying to link on to the iPhone versus the computer as far as that renew here button?
We have been hearing from some users that are having difficulty navigating the system on a mobile device. The advice that we've been giving them is to use a desktop PC to access the system. And then I've actually raised that item quite a while ago with the project team because due to security compliance issues, they don't allow me to test it personally on my work cell phone, which is where kind of the frustration lies, because I would like to be able to duplicate the same problem on my side, but I can only access the test version, which isn't available there. So it's a known issue with the mobile devices, and we'll make that clear in the messaging to licensees to really just, if you're at your computer and you need to take care of your license renewal, access it from a PC or a Mac, but not necessarily from a mobile device just yet.
Yeah, it definitely did not work. So just letting them know so they're not confused and, because then you retry it, and then it seems like the system doesn't work. And that's more due to just informational protection stuff as far as it not working on a cell phone, or?
As far as it not working for an external user on a device, that has to do with the software provider not adequately maintaining that the software can be accessed across different types of devices. It's they've got it. As far as, just to clarify, the comment I was making has to do with testing it. We have a remote test environment where we can get into like a sandbox version of the system, and that's not available to me or any of the staff on our work cell phones, just due to the firewall restrictions we have in place.
Okay. Ms. Cruz, any other comments, questions?
No, you covered the ones around kind of potential risk to the process.
Okay. Ms. Walker, given the other updates you have, do you want me to open this up for public comment now or wait till the end of the agenda with the other topics?
I would suggest, so my update is purely going to be an update on this agenda item. I would suggest that I run through the entire update. The committee can ask questions, and at the end we can call for public comment and then answer any additional questions.
Okay, great.
Sure. So moving on, there's two bills within the meeting materials. The first of which is AB 883, which would require the board to expedite and authorize the board to assist the initial license process for an applicant who's enrolled in the Department or the United States Department of Defense Skill Bridge program. And then there's a second bill in there, it's SB 374, which has to do with amending the way the board would have to maintain records following receipt of a request for a name or gender change. Both of those bills are currently in the suspense file. And during a hearing, during special hearings they're in the suspense file within the appropriations committees of those respective houses. And then during the appropriations suspense meetings that they're going to have next week is when they're going to run through all of those bills and make a final decision on whether or not they move out of that house during this year, or if the bill is essentially going to be on hold until next legislative session. So we'll be tracking that, and we'll keep the committee and also the board updated on the progression of those bills. SB 372 particularly was the bill that there were some concerns raised during the board meeting. So if that bill does move forward, we will brief the board on it and bring it back for further discussion. Let's see. Then we also have within the meeting materials, there's a total of 8 pending regulatory proposals that affect the licensing program. The first of which is Section 100 cleanup for us to go in. We need to cull through all of our existing regulations and ensure that the fee amounts that are currently listed in the regulation are consistent with our new fee schedule that became effective at the beginning of the year. That's something that we've at the staff level, we need to just carve out a little bit of time so we can put that package together and get it filed with the Office of Administrative Law. Being that it's a change without regulatory effect, it's not something that needs to be vetted through the licensing committee or the board. It's just an administrative task that needs to be handled by staff. The second regulation package there listed has to do with the addition of the licensee telephone numbers and email addresses to the board directory. As you likely recall, the board, so the committee first discussed this text at the last meeting, and then at the April board meeting, the board approved the text. So the next step for us is to complete the regulatory package and submit it to DCA for review, and we expect that to be completed by the end of this month. The third package listed has to do with repealing the sponsored free healthcare events, which is another Section 100 change. As you may recall, we had an entire article within our regulations that was outlining the requirements for basically obtaining board approval for a sponsored free healthcare event. The underlying statutory authority for those regulations actually was repealed in 2018. So we went in with a Section 100 change to formally repeal those regulations for consistency. That was completed and it was approved by the Office of Administrative Law on May 4th. One package that we're currently developing right now has to do with implementing Assembly Bill 107, which requires us to provide temporary licensure for military spouses and partners. And under those temporary licenses, we would have to issue a temporary Doctor of Chiropractic license and a temporary satellite certificate to eligible military spouses and partners. We've got some models of regulatory language that's been implemented by other boards within the department that we plan to implement ourselves. Where the challenge lies with this package specifically is that within the board's other regulations and outlining the process for licensure for the regular DC license, there's some vague language and it's not quite clear. So when we develop this language and we put together exactly what the requirements are to get a temporary license, we're likely going to encounter a consistency issue because we're going to have a lot of clarity around how you get a temporary license, but not that same level of clarity about how you get the Doctor of Chiropractic license. So we're trying to kind of sort through that at this point and make sure that we make any additional cleanup changes to the regular licensure process just for clarity purposes before presenting this to the board for review and discussion. We don't anticipate any policy discussion being necessary on this package, so we do plan to prepare the text and bring it directly to the board at the July meeting. But I'm also happy to share the draft text when it's ready with the committee as a working group, just so you're given the advanced review before it goes to the full board. There's a few other packages listed in here. We have the approval of chiropractic schools and educational requirements. This is basically the package that includes everything outside of the chiropractic college curriculum requirements that we'll discuss later this morning. Staff is currently reviewing the text within this proposal. As you'll recall, the licensing committee and the board reviewed it right around the end of last year and at the January board meeting. So from there, we need to review the text, make sure that it's meeting requirements for approval through the Office of Administrative Law. And if any substantive changes need to be made, which is likely just due to the age of the language itself, we're going to plan to, if it's a policy related type of discussion, bring it back to this committee. If it's just purely a substantive change but doesn't affect the policy, we'll plan to bring it directly to the board. But either way, we'll keep the licensing committee updated on kind of the progress of this package after we've vetted it through legal counsel. Later this morning, we're going to be discussing the chiropractic college curriculum requirements. So I'll defer that to the next agenda item. And then there's two other proposals that staff is working on for presentation to the licensing committee. The first of which comes out of the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative. These proposals have been around for quite some time. They were initially assigned to enforcement, but this specific proposal has to do with the circumstances during which you would order either a physical or mental examination of an applicant. So it's more fitting to be reviewed by the licensing committee. What we're doing at this point within the staff is reviewing the text that had been previously approved by the board in 2016, and then evaluating the different requirements that other boards have put into effect since that time. And then we need to vet the text itself again through legal before we can bring it back to the licensing committee for discussion. And then the final package listed there has to do with clarifying language around chiropractic practice locations and requirements for displaying a license. That's another package that the committee has discussed in the past. We're working at the staff level to really develop that proposal so we can bring it back to this committee for further discussion. Are there any questions about the various regulations that I outlined?
Yeah, it seems that the number 4, the licensure for the military spouses, sort of feeds into number 8, as far as we're still in process of defining a place of practice, the satellite issue, the sort of pop-up issue. So I guess that's just really more of a comment. It seems like we need to nail that language down as far as defining a place of practice. How many chiropractors do we have that are in military service that say come to California that require these temporary licenses?
I don't have the exact number. It's a very low number. We get less than a handful per year. It's more of yeah, it's not, we're not expecting in any way a high volume, but what you just outlined, that's one of the challenges in that fact is if we're going to issue a temporary satellite certificate, but yet our regulations don't actually outline how you get a regular satellite certificate, we have a problem. So that's one of the issues there. We want to tackle the temporary Doctor of Chiropractic license first, given that that's what really authorizes you to practice in the state. And then we have some workarounds in place to be able to issue the temporary satellite certificates just within our existing regs. But you outlined it right there. The two kind of feed into each other, where we have this mandate that we're going to have to issue these temporary licenses, yet our regulations don't make it very clear how you would get the regular satellite certificate. So we need to outline that further. We also need to put together what that process looks like when looking at the temporary Doctor of Chiropractic license. To get that, applicants will come here, file their application, they'll be fingerprinted, and they'll end up actually taking the law examination. So in that sense, they've already fulfilled many of the licensure requirements. So we need to define how they then get to the permanent license, given the fact that they've already met certain requirements. So that's the other language that we're working on.
So how long is the temporary license? Like, what is it going to say on their temporary license?
It's going to say temporary Doctor of Chiropractic, and they're valid for 1 year according to the statute. So okay. What it really does allow for is that those that are licensed in another state with a valid license, and their spouses are ordered to come to California, they can get a temporary license and they can just immediately begin working after completing the background check and passing the law examination. And then that 1 year period is really going to provide the opportunity for staff to work directly with the applicant to getting them to full licensure. While they're not on the sidelines waiting for their transcripts and their college certificate, everything else to come in.
I mean, it seems like there's another problem as far as it feeds into reciprocity as well. If we shouldn't have different rules for military versus other people that want to reciprocate with California. So if we have a military person that says only has, part 1 and part 2 of the boards, yet they can come in through military, get a temporary license, take the law exam, and then feed them into a permanent license, I guess I'm not really seeing how, I just see a problem with just regular reciprocity. What are your thoughts on that?
So for them to be eligible for the permanent license, they still have to meet all of the requirements. So we may be in a situation where the person that comes in with a temporary license has a temporary license for a year, but they don't qualify for a regular license, or they may have to go back and take additional portions of the board exam before they can be eligible. So it's not changing in any way what those requirements are, but there is the statute that outlines pretty much that you have to give them a temporary license under, very specific circumstances. And then you've got to basically develop, how do we get them the rest of the way to permanent licensure, assuming that they're meeting all the requirements of California.
And so then, do we have a concern at all? I mean, it's a very small number, but just sort of off the top of my head, do we have a concern as far as enforcement? Say they get a temporary license and it expires, but they end up still practicing, or they file again for a temporary. What does that look like?
So they can't file again for a temporary. It's a one-time license. They'd really fall within the same kind of enforcement concerns we have with all of our licensees that fail to renew, because that is, that's also a common occurrence that, licensees allow the license to lapse. And then if they don't renew it within a certain amount of time, we need to initiate enforcement action to, ensure that they're not continuing to practice without a license. So I see it as a concern, but it also kind of falls within kind of our ongoing activities of monitoring expired licenses.
Okay. Yeah, I think just the last thing, when you have those drafts, I think the committee would definitely like to review the 4, 5, and 6, the drafts when available. Ms. Cruz, do you have any questions?
Nope, none for me. Thank you.
Okay. As far as the statistics, we don't have much to report at this meeting. We're trying to work with getting some better data around our licensing processes. We're reporting volume here today. Really, it's been consistent with what we've seen throughout this fiscal year. We're about on track to issue the very comparable number of Doctor of Chiropractic licenses as we issued during the last fiscal year. Our corporation certificates were, again, pretty much in line with what we saw last fiscal year. The surprising one, or maybe not surprising given that we're coming out of COVID and more practices are opening up, but we are seeing a significant increase in the number of satellite certificates. I mean, as of the end of April, we've already issued, more than we did all last fiscal year. And then comparing that to 2020 through 2021, we're already over 200 above that amount. So it's continuing to grow. And that's also reflected in the licensing population type. Really, it's almost a linear trend there. You can see that the Doctor of Chiropractic license from year to year, there's the steady decline. Corporation certificates have remained relatively flat, and then the number of satellite certificates is increasing. So we're seeing less of a population, but additional locations when we look at our licensing data. See. And then the only other portion of the update has to do with our strategic plan. So there's 2 strategic plan objectives specifically tied to the licensing committee. The first of which is to establish a robust, effective licensing committee to identify issues and increase efficiency. Within the meeting materials, there is our action plan on how we get there. I would say that we're probably about 45 to 60 days behind with the due dates that we've kind of identified at this point, and we plan to catch up in the fall of this year. Really, we've gathered some of the background information on some various licensing issues. I would say the fact that for the most part, prior to this becoming an independent committee, it was a licensing and continuing education committee that really focused on continuing education. So now that we've got our own independent licensing committee, there's a lot of kind of background information on quite aged issues that we need to bring forward to this committee. So we're still gathering a lot of those summary information so we can really provide that to the chair and come up with a concrete plan of, what we're going to do with this committee. We're also, we're in the recruitment efforts for the assistant executive officer position. I've actually already made a selection, but I need to get formal approval from the Office of Human Resources before we can share that information and formally move, anybody into a position. So at this point, that's kind of what's driving a little bit of being behind in this specific objective. The other objective has to do with reviewing reciprocity requirements to minimize barriers to licensure in California. Again, this is an issue that really, it's an interesting one because it ties into the different discussions that the committee's having just around licensure in general. It ties into the temporary license that we were just discussing, but then it also ties into the normal licensure process, the curriculum requirements that we'll be discussing shortly, and then then dealing with people that are licensed originally in another state and wish to come to California. So right now we're currently still in the progress of putting together that environmental scan. We're excited to have that completed here soon, and then we will be sharing a draft with the committee just via email, and then we'd like to formally release it at the next licensing committee meeting, and then we would share it with the public at that point. Are there any questions from the committee on our objectives?
I don't have any right now, Ms. Cruz.
No.
And that concludes my update this morning. So welcome to open it for public comment.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moderator, can you open this agenda item up for public comment, please?
Certainly. And if you'd like to make a comment on the presentation, you can look for the question mark icon, type the word comment and click send, or raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And we do have a couple of hand raises. We've got call-in user 2. I'm going to send you a request to unmute. You'd press *6 to unmute. And each speaker will have 3 minutes with a 15-second warning. Oh, you're unmuted.
Hello, Falcon here, student intern from Life Chiropractic College West. I actually raised my hand for the prior unit about the minutes, but I suppose it was missed. But this is what I have to say. The BCE rules only hold students accountable for a demonstration of skill, including full spine adjusting routine in clinic to get a license. Despite the Council of Chiropractic Education's rule for the state to have a clinical practice proceed with a federal standard option, currently the BC rules do not hold students accountable for the ability to operate at limits of matter, a known principle of chiropractic that already admits the toxicity potentials from reaching adjusting limits. The result is that colleges are producing graduate drivers with licenses who have vehicles and only know how to drive racetracks that have no speed limit restrictions. These drivers never learn how to drive public streets that need speed limit restrictions. In effect, you have a bunch of racetrack drivers that are driving over the speed limit in the public, which is a detriment to society, not a benefit. Surely there is nothing wrong with the culture and the economy that the Laguna Seca racetrack provides for their racers and their community in private practice. That exchange is their right there. However, please at least Allow the option for students to learn how to practice chiropractic on public streets instead of only private racetracks. That is, please allow partial points, 1/3 of 1 point, for the doctor-tiered procedure that collects data and includes measurements from an evaluation that indicates no detection of subluxation and no subsequent adjustment needed at that particular instance. A trust that is already kept within the Department of Health and Human Services, the Veterans Health Administration, Council of Chiropractic Education and Health Insurance. If not, it would be a betrayal of the trust that the Attorney General has imparted onto our profession, as it would undermine the importance of upholding the interest of the public safety. The next full board teleconference is held on July 20th. Would you please have ready for it, the rule edit draft for section 331.12.2? If the full board can vote to send into legal counsel
15
process.
seconds. 10 seconds left. All right, thank you. And at this point, we have a couple of raised hands, but they do seem to be from the same person. I will double check. Okay, some of them are dropping off. Perfect. Are there any other questions? And we would remind the public that comments should be on topic for the report from the executive officer in the licensing program. And I do not see any other requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for reiterating being on topic. Thank you. Thank you to the public for your attendance. We really do appreciate it. And thank you for your comments. And I believe staff has your contact information. So at this point, I believe we're ready to move on to the next agenda item, which is the possible recommendation regarding regulatory proposal to update the Chiropractic College curriculum requirements, CCR Title 16. Ms. Walker, do you want to start with kind of where the staff is at with that issue? Then we can move forward.
Yes, thank you. So as the committee likely recalls, you last reviewed the Chiropractic College curriculum requirements proposed text that had been approved by the board in July of 2020 at your last meeting in 2022. At that time, the committee made a recommendation that the proposed language around section 331.12.2 and then 331.12.3 be returned to the committee for further study and discussion. The board approved that recommendation at its January 20th board meeting. And really, for purposes of today's discussion, is around that language. So last month, Dr. Paris, Dr. Daniels, and I participated in a discussion with the Council on Chiropractic Education and some representatives from the chiropractic colleges, just with some concerns around some of the overly prescriptive nature of the board's current regulations as it relates to chiropractic college curriculum requirements. And then also as far as Section 5 of the Act itself, both of which you can see in the meeting materials. So kind of following that discussion, it's really in line with the discussion we're going to have here today. Is staff is really seeking some direction from the committee on really where to go from here when it comes to these regulations. There's a few different options that we have. I would say just looking first at Section 5 of the Act, it's got the license to practice educational requirements, and it contains a schedule of minimum educational requirements to practice chiropractic in this state. What's interesting about the way that language is written is that it has 8 groups plus electives, and it's broken down into percentages. Then how we got to the regulations that we currently have in effect today was there was the mandate, and you can see it by looking at the text in 331.12.2. There was the mandate given that there be 4,400 hours of education. And then at that time, when the board put this regulation into effect, they then prorated that 4,400 hours based on that content requirement that you see in Section 5 of the Act. These requirements of themselves are at a higher level than that of what's mandated by the Council on Chiropractic Education, which is the accrediting body for the Doctor of Chiropractic programs throughout the country. It requires additional levels of education than what's being required at the national level, which is 4,200 hours. On top of that, it's very prescriptive in nature with the number of hours in various areas. Moving beyond the education portion, it then also has to do, it defines what those various terms mean and the additional hours. And then there's the clinic requirement themselves with the clinic hours. And the clinic hours get very specific that they have to complete the 25 physical examinations, at least 10 of which are on outside patients. And then, the different practical requirements, there's the requirement that they complete 250 patient visits, treatments, including diagnostic procedures, chiropractic adjustive technique, and patient evaluation, written interpretation of x-rays, and then having all of that total up to a minimum of 518 hours of practical clinical experience. So that was what was in effect now. When how this regulation package came to be was there was a series of focus groups in 2015 through about 2016, 2017 with the various colleges who were outlining similar concerns to those that were raised even last month during the call with the same representatives and with the Council on Chiropractic Education. And the result of that effort was in July of 2020, the board had approved the text that you see here, which is under the 331.12.3, where it simply is those two lines. Schools shall ensure all graduates have completed the minimum educational requirements identified in Section 5 of the Chiropractic Initiative Act. What staff needs additional direction from the committee on is twofold. Generally, just getting an idea of the direction that we want to head, because this text itself isn't going to be sufficient for us to make it through the Office of Administrative Law review process. It's not clear enough. So just, simply putting text out there that says that the schools shall ensure all graduates have completed the minimum educational requirements identified in the Act. What does that mean? How is the board going to ensure it? How is that going to translate to the license process where we currently require that they complete the chiropractic college certificate and we check to ensure that they have hours in each of these areas? What is that going to look like if we put that onus on the college? It's like, are we going to, on an annual basis, when they release their next college catalog, are we going to have them certify that they've met those requirements? What would we do in that circumstance? So we're going to need to be more clear at a minimum. There's also the option of considering carrying some of the requirements forward, in new regulations where, rather than maybe not being as prescriptive as we are here, but if we define minimum clinical requirements or if we define minimum educational requirements, we can go down that route as well. We do want to we kind of want to start the discussion there, is just get the idea from the committee on kind of what sense of where should we go from here is really the question. And then as you heard during the public comment that was just previously, we also have the ongoing request from a chiropractic college student that when it comes to those 250 patient treatments or visits, that they be granted some sort of partial credit, such as a third of a point in that circumstance where they don't actually provide a chiropractic adjustment. So that's where we are at this point on this regulation. Really interested to hear from the committee on, where do we go from here? Are we going to develop some prescriptive language or just enhance what we've got in here where it defers to CCE, but just make sure that it's up to muster for us to get it through the Office of Administrative Law?
Okay, thank you. So I think I'll start this conversation off. So a couple things. So as Ms. Walker mentioned, we had met with CCE and some other representatives from other universities that have chiropractic programs. Since then, I reached out to two of the people that were on the call and spoke with them about this issue sort of in more detail. And some of the, so there's sort of a lot to unpack here. If we start with the concern as far as the just the curriculum being overly prescriptive, it is, and it's outdated. So first of all, we know that, and we know that we need to make some changes. It needs to be more contemporary and less prescriptive. Secondly, we do have the CCE, which is an accrediting body. Yet, as they even say in their document, they acknowledge that the DCPs exist in a variety of environments distinguished by differing jurisdictional regulations, demands. And so with each state and almost within California, we have a different cohort than say we do in Nebraska, Iowa, or Florida. So if we step back and say, okay, we know that we need to change the language, it's old and it's too prescriptive. What does the profession look like in 20, 30 years? What kind of language do we want that allows for the progression of the practice, the education, but still allows in California to be particular to our state? So one of the educators who is working on the project of the higher education, which they're even 4 or 5 years behind, which is dealing with competency-based education and entrustable professional activities, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So education is changing as well. And so that's part of the reason we really need to change the priorities of what is in the education in the Act. Not so much throw everything out, but it's really changing those priorities to a competency-based education and EPAs, as I said, which we'll talk about in a second. And so it was of her opinion that living in California, being outside of California, that California is a unique state. It's a very large state with a very large number of different types of population, different areas, different needs. And so we want an education that addresses the particular concerns of the stakeholders and the public. So again, that brings us back to, everyone is doing EPAs, medical, nursing. Chiropractic doesn't really have that, except to me in one area, which is the clinic. And so one of the things that creates an EPA, which is the thing that we entrust the physician to do, they're a trainee and then they graduate and we entrust them to provide healthcare. So in chiropractic, we'll just say providing an adjustment, right? We entrust that they are competent in all the aspects of providing that care. And so we don't really have that in California as far as the specificity of the different populations. So it was of her opinion that California does perhaps need to maintain some different prescriptions than say Iowa or Florida. That's not a bad thing, that we need to take into consideration what are the current healthcare needs in California. And so if we look at the population base, so what I was trying to say is when we write an EPA for a profession, you not only need to look at what the physician needs to do, but we need to understand all the way down to the admissions. Who are we admitting into the program? What are the qualities of that person that we want to enter into this profession? But we also have to take into consideration the stakeholder and what is the current health status of California. You can look at it and say, oh, well, there's, we have post-COVID, we have, long-term COVID. So we have health concerns there. We have increased number of concussions and TBIs. The population is getting older. And so when we're writing an educational curriculum, we have to take into consideration the time that we are in with the cohorts and the stakeholders that we have so that we can provide appropriate care. So it was of her mind as well that California is a particular state. It has a uniqueness. It needs to be more flexible, less prescriptive, but there's nothing wrong with holding on to, if we feel that California requires certain things, there's nothing wrong with that. that our state may require different education than other states. So there's sort of, that issue. The other person that I spoke with, again, is really trying to adjust and move chiropractic more to a competency-based EPA type education. And so to what we do have in that is, let's bring up the clinic and issue. So there's 5 levels of supervision with an EPA. The first level basically is that the student is just watching. And then the 5th level is that they are now entrusted to do something and they can actually teach it to somebody else. Level 4 is, I would say, which is our clinic, which is we're under some supervision, we're protecting the public, yet you can kind of do your thing, right? You're taking them in, you're communicating with them, you're learning how to be a solo or an individual practitioner. You write your own prescription, you perform it, and then you get it signed off by a supervisor that's not sort of directly hands-on. That's the closest that we have to an EPA, and it's good. But the clinic in particular, it's those 3 elements of diagnosing, providing a service, and then having the ability to reassess that. And then also knowing when maximum medical improvement has been achieved, having the skill set to inform a patient that you don't need to be checked, or that this is what I can do for you. You need to go see somebody else, having that education to be able to refer to people. If we are going to be entry-level physicians, we need to know when our services are done, when they're limited, and when that public member, stakeholder needs something else or needs to move on, or et cetera. So those are some of the issues around it. So then I asked about, how do we get our current regulation, like how do we practically change what we have, as what you were saying, Ms. Walker, into something else? And so one of the ways, and I think council is on today, and she's worked in regulatory processes, is if we can write it in such a way that it's, 4,400 hours or its equivalent. And if we start adding equivalent into our language, into the regulatory package, then we can start developing a policy around that equivalence. And so that was a suggestion as far as sort of navigating what we have, and being able to move it forward, still having guardrails, but moving it forward. And there is some talk as far as perhaps CCE defining and approving what equivalent means. So that's a whole, other issue. But as far as writing the language, using or equivalent may be a way that we can start to kind of move this package forward and start changing the language a bit. The other thing, I just want to throw this out there. I think we need to consider the Council on Chiropractic Education is doing amazing work, and they're coming up with, new meta competencies that are relevant to our stakeholders, that in the current educational, in the current world, which is amazing. But again, we want to step back a little bit and say, okay, well, who is going to be governing that in 20 years? Who will be on CCE in 20 years? And what are other regulatory boards? What are they thinking, and how do they see it? And so there was 2 papers done relatively recently, 2019. It's a perspective on councils on chiropractic education, accreditation standards and processes, and their opinions, part 1 and 2. And they interviewed and surveyed the members of CCE, of different CEEs that are around. And as much as they are doing amazing work, and I feel we should really lean on them for 90% of our stuff, I think we need to also consider that there's still educational issues perhaps within that arena, and that it is not necessarily particular to California. And so there's some research findings that I can share with you, Ms. Walker, as far as that goes. And so it's something I think that we all need to sort of consider is, you know, I think CCE is taking the lead. We need to lean on them. We also need to think about our state and our particular issues with a general idea of we need to change it. It needs to be less prescriptive. We need to move it forward. But, you know, there is consensus with some people that California does need dermatology. That should be a requirement, that California does need pharmacology, that should be a requirement. There's a program down in LA that, like, you know, we see the skin more than anybody else. We, you know, we're not going to treat it, but we need to know and recognize so that we can get that person, that patient, to the care that they need as soon as possible. Say we see something that looks suspicious as far as a skin lesion, and we can immediately. So, you know, we talked about, you know, one of the schools not having those items, no pharmacology, no dermatology. And so, you know, it can be fine, but also I think we want to consider what are the educational classes that we do want to keep as far as California is concerned, that is directly related to the healthcare that of the state of California. So I do have more on that, but anyways, those are kind of, hopefully that gives a little bit of insight. Ms. Walker, do you have any questions as far as more? I have more to clarify, but with what I've said so far.
No, that's extremely helpful, and I would suggest that you continue, because this is very very helpful for staff, and I'm already picturing how this is going to translate into regulations themselves, because, you know, clearly we're not going to be going forward with the 331.12.3 in its current form, but we need to sit there and evaluate, you know, certain language that's antiquated or no longer needed. Find ideally a creative solution to where we can still stay within the confines of Section 5 of the Act, but then through regulation, put more you know, modern standards into place. So this is extremely helpful, and I would suggest continue.
Ms. Cruz, any questions so far or comments?
No, none from my end, sorry.
Okay. So at this point, I would I can provide sort of some of the research as far as just taking a step back and looking at who's going to be regulating us, who are we entrusting. So if we look at it wasn't in our packet, but I believe it's, I got it from another meeting, the California Rules and Regs, the recommendations for the change. And if we look at some of what the proposed changes were, I guess, and it was accepted or approved in 2020, and you start going down, and it's like, okay, defer to CCE, and me and, you know, the people that I talk to sort of caution is like, yes, but also cautioning where healthcare, where chiropractic is going to be in the future, and having that ability to sort of steer to the particular needs that we have. So instead of saying strike, we want to defer to CCE and or other, you know, appropriate boards, you know, and then have some language in there as far as equivalency, and still being able to have some flexibility as far as what we want in the curriculum. Also, when we come into the calendar section, you know, as far as being 4 years, 9 months, right? That's too prescriptive, and that's not where education is going. Down south, they're doing a 2-year PT program where it's 1 year of didactic, 1 year of clinicals, and the program's going really well. They have offsite, you know, so live interactive Zoom education, then they come for intensive, for lab intensive. And so we need to start thinking about, which was brought up in the last board meeting, we need to start thinking about, we have to change the language in that section so that new programs can be more competitive and flexible, meaning how do we get really great people that are tending to steer away from the profession because it's 4 years butts in the seat. It's really expensive, it's really difficult, and EPAs and competency-based education is moving in such a way that you don't need that. So we need to write language that allows for that for future programs and current programs to be more flexible. But then it comes down to, we don't have EPAs for our profession. And so the question does lie, which is even occurring in higher education, is how do we measure these competencies? What tools are we using? Now, CCE lays it out as far as, you need 3 different, and again, this then goes into the cost for the program, for the facility, as far as if I need 3 people to evaluate 1 person, that's one of the barriers to jumping from a butts in the seat to a more clinical type experience where that person is getting evaluated ad hoc, which, could be just they come out of the adjustment, tell me what your findings were. That's just a really quick that supervisor is testing that trainee, and then all the way down to the summative type of evaluations, which are, finals and midterms and, more of the exams. So when we come down to the numbers, like it or not, there's a certain, when you read the research, there's a certain number of interactions that a supervisor has with a trainee subconsciously that then leads to, yes, in part leads to this person is ready. We don't know if it's 1, 5, 10, 20, and it's different for each student. Some students move faster, other students move slower. We want to give the slower students time. We want to allow the faster students to progress faster, as long as we're meeting these competencies, and it doesn't matter how long it takes. And so we need to really look at the writing of it. And again, I think maybe the way is, feathering in the word equivalent, and then also working with CCE as far as kind of where that's going. So again, it's a whole kind of mind shift from 4 years butts in the seat. So we don't want to be that prescriptive, but we also want to maintain those guardrails as far as the quality of the education, which I think it is going that way. We have a lot of great people that are really trying to, work in that arena, and CC is definitely, the lead as far as changing those competencies and really working with the language. And these are the skill sets that the doctor needs to have. So those are kind of my thoughts on that, just to sort of like back up. We need to change it. We need to think bigger and sort of break this down. And really, I mean, I started a search on sort of current, say, quote unquote, neurological problems. What are the things that our stakeholders, where are the health concerns, where do we want to lean on the education that we have, and what are those important things that we do want for California, if they are something that we do want, which I and others think that we need to have certain, hold on to certain things. And then I was talking about sort of the numbers, even with like I said, even with a competency-based education or an EPA, there's still a number there. There's still some level. One more thing before I forget, like if we're talking about a class, say it's 3 credits, I think one credit is 1 hour of class time and 2 hours of prep work. So each credit is 3 hours total. So a 3 credit class, say dermatology, is 9 credits. Even with our prescriptive, sort of writing, students are not spending 6 hours probably prepping for the 3 hours of lecture time. So even in our current sort of model of butts in the seats and particular credits, it's really not happening. So just to elicit that, to sort of change our brain as far as how we look at the education into more competency-based, online, interactive, and then again, what are the skill sets that we want associated with, California, our doctors, which sort of leads in then to the reciprocity issue, which we'll be talking, I guess about later, as far as what are the equivalencies from another state to California. What are the things that matter to California? So hopefully that was helpful. If not, let me know and we can, if you have any questions or.
That is helpful. And it's I think that gets us in a good place to get this moving and to start coming up with potential solutions and some text that would be more in line with what you've outlined. The one question that comes to mind, and it may fit more into the reciprocity requirement, but if we're maintaining specific standards for California, how do we envision bridging that gap when someone that, went to school, say in Georgia and got their first license in New York and now wants to come to California? How do we bridge that gap and get them licensed when they may not have the same level of entry education? Because that's the challenge now too, because we go through that license process where we check every box that they have exactly as many hours in all of these subject areas. But if they didn't initially go into school on track to be licensed in California, they're now deficient in that area. So I was just curious if you had thoughts on what that might look like.
Yeah, so again, I mean, it really does, as you said, it just, all of these discussions really tie together, and they need to be all streamlined and they need to be all on the same page. So like with the reciprocity, I mentioned it in the last meeting, but, like for example, if Florida breaks it down, national boards part 1 through 4 in PT with a Florida law exam, with a CCE accredited school. Now, if you graduated before 1990, you had to have 2 years of college credit. After July 1990, you have to have a bachelor's degree. After July 2000, you have to have a bachelor's degree. So when you go on their website, they break it down as far as these are requirements. And then just to, I think maybe to get more to your point, and you look at New York, verification of license from another state. And I know we have language issues with endorsement, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, but verification to me is more simple. Like we just want to verify that by your state you are licensed and there's no, so endorsement is a bit of an issue. But they have national boards part 1 through 4. But if you have 1 and 2 and not 3 and 4, then if you practice for 7 to 10 years and you take a spec exam, then you qualify. So we just have to define it for I feel like we have to define what's important to California, and what are our standards, what are our expectations, and then we have some frameworks from some other states as far as what they're currently doing, that we can have certain dates of where their education is at. National board, I know 4 states do their law exam with a MBCE. They've adapted a law exam for, I can't remember, maybe Ohio, Florida. There was 4 states on there. And so they also have the spec exam. So I think there's a lot we can do as far as what requirements we want so that we make sure everybody's sort of on a level playing field. They can say part, we want a spec exam, and I would have to look at the exam as far as if we're concerned about pharmacology, dermatology, that sort of thing, making sure those items are on there. Again, it's not like to take and it actually, one of the suggestions was maybe the person takes a class. Maybe they take a 3 credit class on dermatology. They can take it from a junior college or whatever. So that was one of the suggestions as far as getting people up to speed that are coming from different states that maybe or are older or matriculated earlier, that don't have the same educational requirements that we want now. So those are kind of my thoughts on it. I think we just really need to define what's important to California and California stakeholders and what we hold as a competent clinician, and then from there sort of move outward with the regulation, equivalency, creating that flexibility, making sure what our standard is. And then I feel like reciprocity as far as what our requirements would kind of fall into that once we have it clear on what we want. Thoughts?
I agree. That makes sense. My only other question would be, we've mentioned two different parts because you've got the contents of the education program and the different subject areas that are involved in, defining minimum and then specific ones that are necessary for California licensees. Then there's also the clinic hours. In your opinion, which of the two is there? Are we kind of putting equal efforts into updating both, or are we thinking that the clinic hours might be where it needs to be more prescriptive, and then just maybe outlining minimum requirements for subject matter, just kind of expanding on that just a little bit?
Okay, if I understand your question, let me know if I don't. Clinic, the overall curriculum needs to be less prescriptive, more flexible. And then within that, not only clinic requirements, but say, I'm just using these as an example because they've come up in other programs, chiropractic programs, and the need for them, like say dermatology and pharmacology. So we kind of have the broad strokes, CCE deferment, or 4,400 hours or equivalent. Can we use that language, defining that, and then sort of titrating down to more of the specifics and really doing a self-study as far as the needs for California. Like an example with the program in Southern California, like they feel doing a dermatology residence is really important for a chiropractor. And that's another thing, like if we're thinking reciprocity, well, can they do a, short residency in a dermatology office? And would that count the same as say a 3-credit class, right? Because it's really not just about the class and looking at pictures, but really that in-person live being taught, seeing those patients. So they're talking about doing residencies, right? As far as in pharmacology, in dermatology, and really getting that chiropractors into other professions to increase the collaborative effort and understanding our profession and us being able to understand their profession, where are those boundaries, and then how to collaborate and refer. So hopefully at the beginning I answered your question.
You did, yes, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Cruz?
Now, this is very much your topic area of expertise compared to mine. So no, I think even me myself, I'm kind of, as I'm taking notes, a lot of this actually is helping me further understand. I would say where the concerns and gaps are. And I would say the only comment I can add on is that you mentioned earlier of the leading indicators as it relates to kind of supervisory or interactions is just, it's not just, that's I would say a leading indicator approach, not just in education, it's everywhere. What's it called? It's actually one of our standard measures where I am for any type of kind of consistent piece of work or even safety we do. So
yeah, and it depends on like how far you want to go down the rabbit hole. I mean, just when you're looking at evaluating competency-based education EPAs, you read Ten Cotty's work, who's kind of pioneered this from 2005. And competency-based education really kind of hit the road ground running sort of after World War II, which is where this kind of started, was because there was postdoctoral education that was really increasing after World War II. And then that sort of had a trajectory, and then you got to the 90s. And then the early 2000s, it was more of a push for CBEs, competency-based education. Then there's a problem, a gap between how schools and teachers do this CBEs, because it was different. And then what are the qualities and how do you train the faculty to be able to interact with a trainee? And that all has, what's that?
Oh, to be honest, I'm actually also seeing that, in just other graduate programs as well, the kind of complete transition, right, from not just with COVID, but from like in person, complete, you can only learn advanced statistics through, by being in person. No, you can learn it online as well, right? And
Yeah.
so that, to your point, and that's kind of what I was going to lead to, that need to not just, what's it called, make sure that the instructors are able to best relay this information and relay the importance of what they're teaching in these different avenues, forums, or even kind of ways of doing, but also that the students are able to receive it. Um, where in this, I would say, because I was kind of like, I'm in my head, I have like in my imaginary flow chart of kind of how it all feeds into each other. From what's it called? The having I'm gonna get all the acronyms incorrectly, but going from making sure that, we're good with um, with the accrediting bodies, right? Or the CCE that kind of confirms the accreditation of the different schools and colleges, the standards that those schools and colleges hold, and then, that then plays into the what we would expect the competency level to be of those outgoing students. Where in kind of in that chain, and I just want to make sure kind of how we play into a lot of this with what we're talking about, we are the ones proposing regulations that feed into what we expect those standards to be in each of those, or are we only really feeding into one area?
I mean, if I understand correctly, I mean, my understanding is like, the board is in charge of the regulations, right? So
Mm.
we want to provide regulations that have those guardrails, have the importance for California, but allow the programs and the institutions in California to
Mm.
sort of do their thing. They're the ones that are executing the education, and there's different ways to do it. So, we want to be flexible enough to allow them to get to that point, but it's really the schools and say national boards and those metrics as far as how many people are passing the boards, what is that percentage, how many people are going into practice, staying into practice, that are some of the things that they use for if a program is competent or if it's being successful and attaining all those things. So I'm not sure if I answered
No, no,
that, but
no, you got it.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
no, you
yeah.
got it. I
So
want to make sure. It's just like where should really it's a very large scope, but at the end of the day, kind of where does our scope lie? Where does our, we have levels of influence, throughout that entire flow, but where does our specific, I would say, direct impact and influence lie? That's going to be at the end of the day, in the regulations.
yeah, I
And
think it's, when I think about it, I step back and I think about the patient and I think about the people that are going to chiropractors and the people in the state of California, and who are those people? What is their education? What are their demands? What are kind of, what are they used to? All of that stuff.
Mhm.
And, the board, my understanding is like to provide the guide rails of like, this is what we want. Protects the people and gives them the best care. And then it's with but we want to allow those institutions and those programs to, be able to do their thing as long as they're showing those competencies, which, are in the middle of being defined, right? Even in the Council for Higher Education, they're rewriting all of their stuff and they're like 4 years behind, as far as answering your question, like how do we measure this? This is still like a very, in motion thing as far as education and what that looks like. But and Ms. Walker, you can correct me if I'm wrong, our job is just to sort of do the guardrails, the regulations, public safety, and not only safety, but like the welfare. What did the patients of California need
Yeah.
from the chiropractic profession that is within our license?
Mhm. I appreciate it. And actually, a question for Miss Walker. Is there any, I'm wondering kind of across the different committees, for our board, are there any other kind of related um, regulatory efforts that may overlap with this? I know this specific, we're specifically focused on licensing, which means, that kind of the full process of that leads up into a person becoming licensed in any way. I'm just wondering if this overlaps with what's it called, the ongoing education for any other regulations we might be working on.
I wouldn't say it overlaps, but it does. We can draw parallels, and there is some relation to the work that we're doing in the area of continuing education. That would be we're in this sense, and Dr. Daniels described it perfectly. The board has authority to set the educational standards for entry into California as a licensee, and then also to set the ongoing continuing education standards to maintain licensure. What we're doing here at this point is reviewing those entry level, getting into the profession educational requirements. And it's really it's a balancing act in the sense that the board could have their own prescriptive requirements, but given that there's also national standards, there's areas where it's no longer necessary to be that prescriptive. And then there's certain areas that are for public protection, such as the example of dermatology, excuse me, where it makes sense that California does continue to have those standards. So, yeah, long-winded answer, but to tell you, I would say the closest relation would be with the efforts that we've made in continuing education, and we did just modernize those. So we're going to be going through the process on that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So I'd really like to open up to public comment and sort of move on if we're at a place to do that. Just one more thought. I mean, in 2017, the occupational analysis of the chiropractic profession, when you read that document, if you look at it, part of what was on there as far as the occupational analysis, just for example, is heart exam. So, there's some people that feel, oh, you don't need to do that. You don't need to learn that. But if we're looking at what the tasks of a chiropractor do, you look back at that 2017 occupational analysis from the board and what those results are, those can help guide us as to, I think, maybe a little bit as to, this is what people are doing. This is where the education needs to be as well. Ms. Walker, are we out of, I sort of feel like, I don't know if we need a separate work group to sort of, hash out some of the details. I'm open to that. But at this point, are we able to move forward? Do you have enough information?
Yeah, I agree with you. The staff has the feedback that we need to take this offline. Just given the expertise on this committee, we can take it at a work group level to kind of hash out the details of regulations. And then when it's ready for a more public discussion, we'll bring it back formally and put it on an agenda.
Okay. Any other comments before I open it up to public comment?
And for me?
Okay. And since I think Sabina would agree, there's no need to make a motion. Right. Okay. Moderator, can you open this up to public comment, please?
Certainly. So we've opened up the WebEx Q&A to facilitate public comment. If you'd like to make a comment, you can look for the question mark icon, type the word comment, and click send. And we also do have a couple of raised hands. Again, if I'm not sure if someone might be logged in more than once, but we have a request from someone logged in as Falcon. I'm going to send you a request to unmute, and you'll have 3 minutes with a 15-second warning. You're unmuted. Okay, you muted yourself again. We were not hearing your voice. Okay, try again.
Yeah, this is Falcon.
Great. We can hear you.
Okay. A couple notes. Start with how does the doctor-patient relationship proceed without breaching the limit that flags adjusting toxicities? The Veterans Health Administration says that meeting for the detection of subluxation is better than not meeting at all. If a patient prepares and then attends an office visit and achieves data within parameters that indicates no subluxation, then that is a mark of benefit for that patient for that instance. However, BC rules currently actually categorizes that instance as a failure for the student intern. As far as particulars or details or I don't want to get into what the data should look like. An example, and narrow it down to 1/8 of an inch, or more liberally speaking, a quarter. But I do hope that priority is placed on the rule I did for section 331.12.2 and the partial point system that I've been repeating. Thank you.
And I do not see any other, well, there's a second hand from the same person. It's up to you if you'd like to continue or not. Oh, and we do have a raised hand from someone logged in as Anna Facinato. And Anna, I'm going to send you a request to unmute. And you're unmuted. Okay, Anna, we're not hearing your voice.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Hi. I'm Anna Facinato. I'm the Dean of the Los Angeles College of Chiropractic here and the Southern California University of Health Sciences. I just want to say thank you to the group. I know the staff has been working a lot on this. And I also want to say thank you to Dr. Daniels for all your comments. I think they're very important points that you made. And moving this towards a more aligned with the accreditation standards will continue to support the students' education as well as the needs for our state. So I just want to appreciate everyone's work on this and say that our school is supportive of this important change.
All right, thank you. And we have no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Before we move on to the next item, any last comments from the board or staff?
For me?
No, we can move on.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item. And this is on starting a conversation on the college's preceptor and postceptor clinical experience programs. And Miss, I think it's Miss Pito was going to give us an update on that.
Yes, we actually have a presentation. Thank you, moderator, for putting that up. So, good morning, first of all, committee members. We have a presentation for you that I will go over that includes the board's existing process for reviewing and approving preceptor requests and give an overview of the requirements of the Washington and Arizona chiropractic boards. So, next slide, please. Thank you. What is the preceptorship program? So it's optional clinical experience program where student interns and recent graduates can gain practical experience in a private chiropractic office. It's sponsored by the college and a licensed DCs serve as a preceptor. Next slide, please. So preceptorships. Each college determines the structure and guidelines for their specific program. The preceptor must be a licensed chiropractor, carry malpractice insurance, and have no restrictions that prohibit them from participating in the preceptorship program. Colleges also arrange for insurance to cover the student intern. Next slide, please. So regulation of preceptorships, there's 44 of the 50 states that recognize the preceptorship programs offered by chiropractic colleges. 42 states allow interns to adjust. However, in Washington, they must first pass the jurisprudence exam. North Carolina and West Virginia, they cannot adjust at all. Then the states that do not recognize preceptorship programs is Hawaii, Louisiana, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island. There are also 18 states that require preceptor and or interns to submit an application for approval of the preceptorship program. Next slide, please. California Code of Regulations Section 312 states in part that unlicensed individuals are not permitted to diagnose, analyze, or perform a chiropractic adjustment. However, it also provides an exemption for student doctors participating in a board-approved preceptorship program. Additionally, California Code of Regulations Section 313 states in part that no licensee of chiropractic in the state of California shall offer a student or prospective student of chiropractic any promise or inducement that either written or verbal that he or she may be legally employed in any chiropractic private office or chiropractic school or college to practice chiropractic with or without compensation before graduation from chiropractic college and before receiving a license from the board. However, it also states that this section does not apply to students and doctors who participate in preceptorship programs sponsored by chiropractic institutions holding status with the Council on Chiropractic Education or seeking such status. Additionally, the board's disciplinary guidelines contain a standard term and condition of probation prohibiting the probationer from serving as a preceptor in preceptorship programs. Next slide, please. Business and Profession Code Section 1006.5 Subdivision S authorizes the board to collect a fee of $72 from those who apply for approval to serve as a preceptor. However, other than California Code of Regulations Section 312, which provides an exemption for student doctors participating in board-approved preceptorship programs, the board's regulations do not address students' participation in these programs. The board has developed a preceptor request form to facilitate requests for approval, which has been included in your materials. Next slide, please. So after receiving a preceptor request, staff conducts a license verification, checks the practice location to confirm it's on file with the board, whether it's their primary or satellite location, verifies that the preceptor is not on probation, and transmits approval notification to the chiropractic college. Our only current criteria for denial is an expired license or if the licensee is on probation. Past disciplinary history is transmitted to the college. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of Washington's requirements. Washington requires that their application package includes a $155 fee with the preceptor's social security number, national provider identification number, their name, date of birth, address, phone number, email, and any other names used. They also have to include proof of malpractice insurance, proof of licensure, attestation, and verification of approval by an approved college to participate in the preceptorship program. It must also include from the student intern or postgraduate trainee their social security number, name, date of birth, address, phone number, email, the preceptor's name, the college information with approval of dates of participation in the preceptor program, and accuracy of the information attestation. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of Arizona's requirements. Arizona requires that their application package includes a $75 fee with the preceptor social security number, date of birth, address, phone number, email, their license number, the years that they have been in practice, any disciplinary or conviction history, verification of approval by an approved college of chiropractic, and a waiver of confidentiality that permits the board to access any information used to evaluate their eligibility. The student intern or postgraduate must provide their name, date of birth, address, phone number, email, a current photo, their conviction history, the college information with approval dates of participation in the preceptor program, National Board of Chiropractic Examiners scores, and they must have passed at least parts 1 and 2 to be eligible. Letters of recommendation from the Dean of Academic Affairs and the Director of Clinics, and college information with approval dates of participation in the preceptor program. Next slide, please. So at this meeting, staff is asking the committee to engage in a policy discussion regarding the potential need to develop regulations regarding the approval of chiropractic college preceptorship programs. So the topics for the committee's discussion is the potential need to develop regulations for the preceptor approval process, defining the roles and responsibilities of colleges, preceptors, and interns, set minimum requirements for approval of preceptors, and any additional requirements such as patient notification, informed consent, name badge while on premises, limit for the program participation, such as 1 year after graduation. So thank you for watching, and I will now turn it back to the committee to continue discussion on this.
Thank you. That was great. Really appreciate your work on that. Ms. Walker, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to just add a little bit of context for really how this came to be and the request before the committee today. So the enforcement committee is actually working on updating section 312 where it outlines the acceptable activities by unlicensed individuals within the practice. And that's where really our only mention of preceptorship programs exists within our regulations, and it's simply a carve out. So it says that, you know, this section relating to unlicensed individuals doesn't apply to those in an approved preceptorship program. Where we're going to encounter issues as we try to go through the regulation process on that package that the enforcement committee is working on is that if we're saying something doesn't apply, but then we don't have any regulations at all that address what that specifically is, we're going to encounter an issue. There's, you know, evaluating kind of what's going on throughout the country with these programs. It ranges from simply having regulations that really defer to the colleges to vet those that are participating in the program. We took a look at the requirements and kind of the process that our current state, the colleges within the state currently have for vetting these programs, and they do have safeguards in place, and you know they do look into the licensee's background. They ensure it's a good fit for the student. They pair them together. So there's already safeguards in place, but then when you look kind of nationally with what we've got going on, you've got some states where it's a very regimented process that includes as much as even filing for a permit simply to be able to participate as either a preceptor or an intern. So in the continuum of no regulation to, you know, very strict, we wanted to get some kind of sense from the committee on what may be appropriate. What we currently have in place right now is we have statutory authority to collect a fee, and really in exchange for making that fee, since we have no regulations really in effect, what that becomes is by paying that fee and requesting approval as preceptor, the board's basically doing a license verification and saying, you know, yes, there's nothing that would prohibit this person from serving as a preceptor and transmitting that information back to the college. Where there could be some additional ways to help in that area is if there's interest in defining maybe a minimum number of years of practice before you can perform as a preceptor. It may be redundant because the schools do that as well. There's also the idea of, you know, disciplinary history. Currently, it's if you're actively on probation or if you don't have a valid license, you wouldn't qualify. Should there be additional time, you know, if the day after someone comes off probation, is it appropriate for them to be a preceptor? Why or why not? That's something that we'll kind of develop as we work on this issue. And then if there's the need for any additional requirements to be spelled out, you know, we occasionally get enforcement cases with unlicensed people in the office that are performing adjustments, and it's difficult for us to assess whether or not they're in a preceptor program because we don't have a very adequate tracking method in place. Right now, as you see on that form that's in the materials, we collect the name of the intern, and then we collect their expected graduation date. But we're not even collecting, the time frame of which they're going to be involved in the program. I think that would be more helpful for us to have, is to know that when they're signing up for the program, they're expected to begin on a certain date and there's an end date. There's also the issue of there's the post-septorship programs, which occur generally after someone's already graduated from college, and they're still they may be still pursuing some of the board exams. They haven't completed them all, and they want to continue in a post-septorship program prior to licensure. How long can that continue before at some point it needs to stop? So it might make sense to put some sort of deadline in place. The one that we've seen most commonly, looking at other states and then also looking at the policies of the schools, is generally 1 year after graduation. So those are the different kind of discussion areas, but really just to kick it off is just to, we've defined a little bit of the issue, and then getting a sense from the committee on going from, little to no regulation to a thorough permitting process, which I would estimate is not going to be in line with what we would want, just given the different discussions on reciprocity and eliminating barriers, but just kind of getting some sense of where we go from here on potentially developing these regulations so that at least we have something that defines this program a little bit further.
Thank you. So what is our ability for regulation at this point with this?
So at a minimum, I would advise that we need to develop what a preceptor is, like define it. And then we can go from, at a minimum, we just need to define what it is. And then that way, when we've got the regulation that says, that a intern can adjust while they're part of the program, we then have a regulation that actually defines what that program means. I would say it's also important that we collect at a minimum the name of, the information about who the preceptor is, and then also the intern and the valid dates that they're involved in the program and the sponsoring college. So at a minimum, we should collect that information. We could, layer additional requirements on top if it's necessary. The other thing that's not addressed